I'm a writer and a consultant. I'm a retired federal government analyst. I worked for the federal government for 32 years. That included service with the Jimmy Carter White House, with NASA, and I spent the last 21 years with the U.S. Treasury Department. I also taught school for 2 years. I taught history at a private school in Washington. I've been a farmer, I've been a businessman, and today I'm a writer. So that's what I do. Well, I went to work at NASA in 1985 in July, and I was there in the comptroller's office. My specialty is finance, public finance, government finance, and so they hired me as the main resource analyst for the Space Shuttle solid rocket boosters. And I had to learn the hardware. I had to learn how the thing worked. And the first assignment I got was to go over to the Office of Spaceflight, which was where they launched the shuttles from. This was the headquarters in Washington, and find out what they were saying about the O-ring joints in the solid rocket boosters, because they were having some kind of problem, and they wanted me to go over, talk to the engineers, and document it. So I went over there and I sat down with the two top solid rocket booster engineers, and they told me this thing was so dangerous that they were afraid it could blow up whenever the Challenger, or whenever the space shuttle was launched. And they were trying to fix it, but they weren't quite sure how they were going to do that. And they were very frank and open. So I went back and I wrote a fairly lengthy memo to the people in the comptroller's office about this. And I continued to write about it all through the fall. The engineers were very open with me, telling me things that were not public, that had not gotten out to any other party in the government or outside the government. And when Challenger blew up, they knew, and I found out very quickly exactly what had happened, and it was the very things that they had told me about that they had been working on. NASA knew when Challenger blew up what had happened, because the night before the disaster, there had been teleconferences that lasted literally for hours, where the engineers with the contractor, who was a company called Thiokol out in Utah, had been arguing to stop the launch because the temperatures were so cold. This big cold front had moved into Florida, and essentially it was going to freeze the joints in the solid rocket boosters where these O-rings were located. And they were fairly certain that this was going to be a disaster, because they'd been warning about this and investigating this problem for really about a year. So NASA knew what had happened the next morning after the disaster. In fact, they had the films of the O-rings being burned through on the launch pad, as well as the films, the videos of what had happened in flight. And so they knew, and they had made a decision that they were not going to tell people about this. They were going to maintain the stance that this was a terribly complicated situation. They were going to look at every possibility. They had no idea what had gone wrong. And I was sitting there with the documents to disprove that. And so I was challenged, was I going to become part of the cover-up that was beginning, or was I going to do what I felt was my duty as a citizen and as a government employee whose job it was not to, to cover up the problems, but to actually, be honest and forthcoming about it. So I gave documents to the press, and then when I was called before the Presidential Commission that was set up to investigate this, I was the first NASA official to say, yeah, we knew this could happen. Well, there was certainly a challenge. I mean, I saw very clearly what I was expected to do. In fact, I was told what to say when I was going to testify before the Presidential Commission. I was given the lies to say. And I couldn't do that. I was an idealist. I still am. I went to William and Mary. I felt I was following in the footsteps of Thomas Jefferson, who was my hero, my ideal. And I took an oath to the Constitution of the United States when I began to work for the federal government. And the Constitution says we the people. I mean, I believe these things, and I took it very seriously. And I was challenged, and my ethics were challenged. My conscience was challenged, and I just couldn't do it. I could not go along with the system when the system was telling me to do the wrong thing. I just couldn't do it.